Hello, welcome back to I Got Board Game.
Board game.
I got board game.
Okay.
Erica is so excited.
My wife.
And so today we are back with a board game review for you.
Who are
I am Ben,
you? And I'm John.
and we are here with a board game review for you. And today we are reviewing a deduction game. So purely deduction, no bluffing, not even really social deduction. Just a deduction game that can play up to, how many people? 7 players is what it says on BGG. Yeah, that seems right. Yeah, 7 players. This game came out in 2013, so it is pretty old now. But when it first came out, it was one that I backed on Kickstarter and ended up teaching it to a lot of people actually over the years. And so I've played this a lot. I think on my BGG page, I played it 51 times, probably at least.
At least, yes.
And so what is that game, John?
It is People versus Zombies.
Wow, that's dark.
Syringe.
That is dark.
Antidote. No, but it is the game Antidote.
Antidote by Bellwether Games. Like I said, came out in 2013, was on Kickstarter. And I think even a couple years later, they had an expansion also that was also on Kickstarter. But we'll be talking about the base set, this small box that you can get. And we'll first start with a brief explanation of how it's played. Not all the rules, but just a general idea of what you'll be doing in the game. And then we'll get into our thoughts and experiences on it. And so to get started with that, I will be showing just pictures of some of the main cards. There aren't that many very helpful pictures I could find on Board Game Geek to show this. So I'll actually even just show some of these right now and then switch over to showing the cards that I actually have out in front of me right here. But basically in this game, you are all scientists in a lab together, and you found that someone has spilled some toxic substance, this X substance. You don't know which substance it is, but the whole idea then is, since this was spilled, you're gonna all have to compete to get the antidote so that you live. And the way this works is, during the setup of the game, there's going to be these X cards. And so when you're playing the game, you have a deck of formula cards, which are these different formulas. There's a total of 8 formulas. And so here's some pictures of the different formulas. Let me see if I can cycle through this. There you go. That's another one. C9 tonic, M3 sun. And so there's actually a total of 8. Most of the time you'll just be setting up the game with 7 of these different formulas. But you'll basically be taking the cards of these formulas and their X card version, which basically has an X in the corner, and then their numerical version, which is basically numbered 1 through, I believe, 1 through 7. Yeah. But basically, you'll just be following the chart that comes in the rule book. Let me show you that. Basically, this is the rule book, really simple, small rule book. And you'll just follow the chart inside for however, let me see how close I can get this, however many players you have. And so then how many formulas you're playing with, and then which numbers of those formulas you're going to be using to create the deck that you're playing with. And then basically the remaining cards will be filled in with syringe cards, which we'll explain a little bit later. But basically you'll set up the deck with these formula cards, and then you'll have the X card versions of these formulas separate, and you'll choose one randomly. No one looks at it, right? You'll shuffle the X cards, like in John's background. Those are the X cards you might be playing with. You'll shuffle them together and then put one of them face down in the middle. And so that's essentially the chemical that was spilled in the lab. And then you'll take the rest of the X cards along with a certain number of syringes, shuffle those, and deal the remaining ones out to the players. And so after you do that, you'll take the rest of the deck, which is the numbered formula cards, shuffle those and deal those out equally to all the players. And so the way the rules have it set up when you're preparing the deck is everyone will start with the same number of cards. But then the whole point then is, since there's one card, one X card in the middle face down that no one knows what it is, that is the chemical that was spilled. And so your goal in the game is to end up with a card, a number card of that same formula. So if the face down X card was this red one, you'll want to end the game with a red numbered card in your hand. And that's basically you taking the correct antidote to live. And so the way you're going to go about this then is play is going to go clockwise. And on a player's turn, they just have one action, but three possible options. The main option is to have everyone discard a card. And so this game mostly, for most of the time, plays like a simultaneous play game, meaning everyone's taking actions at the same time. But whoever is the active player will choose what action people are doing. So the active player can have everyone discard a card. So everyone will put a card face down from their hand in front of them, basically one that they don't want to hold on to anymore. And then everyone will reveal it at the same time. And then that kind of becomes open information to everyone else that, oh, that player doesn't want that colored chemical anymore. So maybe they think that's not the antidote. Another option you have is you can have everyone pass a card to the player on their left, or pass a card from their hand to the player on their right. And then the other action you can do is kind of combined with this passing left or right. The other option for that is you could talk to players individually and ask them if they want to trade with you. And so that's basically a way to trade information with each other, right? If you're asking someone for a certain card, it might be because you think that's the antidote. So you're like, oh, I'll trade you an orange card for a green card. And maybe that's because you think a green card is the antidote and you're hoping they don't realize that. The main trade you'd probably do is trading X cards. And we'll probably explain that more during our review part of a little bit of the strategy and how to play the game well. But then the last option you have is to play a syringe card, which then essentially you're playing a card from your hand face down in front of you, not in front of you. You're playing it, you're giving it to someone else to randomly take another card from their hand, or you're playing it in front of someone else and taking a card that they already discarded in front of them. And so that function is important, the way I clarified that, because you have to keep in mind, as a simultaneous play game, the way it's set up is everyone has the same number of cards at the same time. And that's important because ultimately the game will end when players have done enough of the discard action so that every player ends up with just one card in their hand. And that remaining card in each player's hand is the antidote that they're taking. And so once everyone comes down to one card in their hand, they'll show what card they have remaining and then reveal the X card, the dangerous chemical in the middle that's face down the whole game. And you'll see who matches that one. And whoever matches it has the same formula type wins the game. And then there's obviously a different variant in the rules where you could say whoever has the same formula as the X card in the middle, they all win, or whoever has the highest number of the correct formula is the actual winner. That person survived better. But yeah, that's basically how it plays. There's also a couple of expansion modules that come in the box, and so we'll go over that when we share our thoughts and if we actually played any of those. And so yeah, that's basically how the game plays. And so going into our thoughts on the game, John, do you want to share your pros? And I'll kind of just flash some cards as you mention them so people can see what some of the, I'll just throw them up all over the place. But yeah, I can just kind of show some of them if you mention them.
Yeah. So thoughts about the game. It's very simple, actually. It's a very simple game. It sounds initially, maybe as the rules are explained, it does maybe initially feel like, oh, there's a lot of cards, and then there's a lot of actions that seem like are happening. So yes, lots of cards in Ben's hand. But really, it's not a very complicated game. In fact, it's actually really fast and it's really quick to pick up on. I think it's really cool because, as Ben was mentioning, this is a deduction game, but it's not a social deduction game. So I think we've thrown out the term social deduction a lot when you think of games like Mafia, you think of Resistance, Bang. A lot of these games are like social deduction, Secret Hitler. These are all variations of social deduction in which you're trying to figure out kind of identities or secret identities or who players are, what their objectives are. But in this game, this is, as Ben had said, it's a pure deduction game because the object of the game isn't figuring out what other people are. It's figuring out a piece of secret information in the middle that nobody sees, and then trying to ensure that you have, the correct information to be able to end with, the right card in your hand. So I think that's a really clever idea for a game, and especially for the number of players that's also allowed in this game, I think is really cool. So this is a game that I definitely think is also rare in the sense that it doesn't matter how many players you have, the gameplay, like the overall time that it takes to play this game is short and it's quick. And it doesn't, like, if you have 2 players or 3 players playing it, it's just as fast as playing it as if you had 7 players playing this game, because another thing that Ben had mentioned is the fact that everybody has kind of the same amount of cards and is kind of doing the same things at the end of the day, which makes it also really simple versus certain games, like, because you have different identities, then there's like different types of things you'll want to do as you're playing through the game. This game, everyone's doing the same thing, trying to figure out what is that chemical in the middle.
Yeah, I think what really made this game stick out to me when I got it originally was the idea that it's pure deduction. Because I think, one of the, or a few of the games that got me into the hobby a long time ago were, like you mentioned, Bang and the Resistance, which we have reviewed on this channel. And those, always paired deduction with the social element of it, which then was about, people playing differently, people trying to figure out how people are going to win. But then, in this one, it's simplified then because, everyone's trying to do the same thing. And there's only the one way to win. You just have to survive, basically. And I think that was just something that was a simplification, and also something that makes the gameplay and understanding of the game very clean. And so that's why it kind of really stuck out to me originally. And I think also what stuck out to me originally was that it was simultaneous play. I actually really do like that feel. It's kind of, I think, what draws me to like drafting games also, right? Because drafting often in board and card games is done simultaneously, right? People are passing a hand and then choosing a card from their new hand at the same time to keep. And so similar in this being simultaneous play, you're mostly taking actions at the same time so that everyone has the same hand count, right? Like hands of cards. And so everyone's hand size is decreasing at the same rate. And that's essential to how the game plays. And so, I think that was cool because with a lot of other deduction games, I do think of it being more of maybe a cooperative deduction game. And, each player's taking a turn and trying to figure out their piece, and then that person figures out their piece. But in this one, it's just, we're all going to discard now. So you'll know what you know after this, and we'll all know what we can see from everyone else.
Yeah. And kind of talking about now mechanics and that style, right? So being a competitive deduction game versus a cooperative deduction game is really cool. And I think that's actually one of the things that seems a little misleading about this game. So I think when I first started, when Ben first introduced me to the game, I think one of the first things I thought about was like, why would anyone ever discard cards if you can just pass cards constantly, or like do trades and kind of figure out information that way, or do like syringes and just kind of trade cards between people with that. But I think one of the cool things, which to me actually almost feels thematic to the game, is as cards start getting discarded, a sense of urgency starts coming to the players as you start running out of cards in your hand. And it kind of has that same feeling of the fact of there's a chemical that was really a toxic chemical, and you all are going to die if you don't have the right, or like thematically, your character, you're going to be dead if you don't have the antidote. And as you start having to discard cards, you start realizing like, what if I don't have the right card in my hand and I need it to be my turn so I can try to trade and make sure that I can get that new card, or I have a syringe in my hand and I need to be able to use it so I can steal somebody else's antidotes from their hand or something like that, where you really get that kind of sense of the feel as you discard cards. And I think that's one of the things that it doesn't feel like it's very important, or it kind of feels like, oh, I guess it just makes the game move on. But it's actually really, really important that the discarding happens, because as I mentioned, it's not just to show that you have less cards in your hand, but the other thing about discarding is like that becomes open information for everybody. So as Ben mentioned in the rules is when you take a card and you place it face down and then everyone flips it, that basically means that everyone can see that information of what card did you discard. So like in the case of what Ben's showing, maybe he discarded this pink vial. What is it called? W2 rose, W something rose.
Yeah.
Something rose.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why did Ben discard that card? And that becomes something that I can use for my deduction, right? Because then I can think like, oh, did Ben discard that because he knows that that's not the actual antidote, right? That he needs. Maybe he has the pink X in his hand as well, or something. Or is it Ben just discarded a random card because he has no idea what he's doing right now? Because that could happen. Sometimes it's just like you have to discard and you really don't know if it's the right thing or not to do.
Yeah, and like I think a brilliant part of how the deduction is set up in the game, right, is with the X cards, right? Where in the rules I had mentioned, right, one of these is set face down in the beginning, and that's what you're trying to figure out, right? Everyone's trying to figure out that they need the antidote for this indigo serum N by the end of the game, right? But then part of the rules that I explained is the remaining X cards then are dealt out to the players.
Yeah.
And why that's important then, if you think about it, is that if you have an X card, then you know that the center card is not that color. And so that's kind of what John was getting at too, right? If I had the pink X card at some point in the game, then I know that I absolutely do not want to hold pink cards at the end, because that's not the answer, right? It's not whatever's face down in the middle. And so, and then that goes into the important action of trading with people, right? Discarding is, like kind of the biggest momentous action. And I think with what you were describing too, there's always those moments in the game where people are like, having people pass cards or trading one-on-one. And then when someone finally says discard, you're like, no! Like, why are you trying to kill us all? But
I'm a proponent of the discard.
but the other big action you'll do is what I mentioned, is the trading one-on-one, right? You can trade a card 1-for-1 with a player. And again, this is not a social deduction game, so there's no bluffing. So you can't lie with what you're trading. But in my example, I had said, you could say, I'll trade you like an orange card for a blue card, because you might think blue is the solution. And maybe you're trying to trade with someone who you think they don't realize that, so they're willing to trade with you. But what's much more common, is you're going to be asking, can I trade you an X card for an X card? Because that's guaranteed information, right? If you can get another X card that you haven't seen before. And so that's the most common trade that you'll do to get for sure information. But then obviously there's times where if you're not following the trades clearly over each player's turn, you'll end up getting an X card back that you already knew before. And then you're like, it's like, no, I already knew this. And those are funny moments, because you kind of realize it was a little bit your fault, because you knew you traded that card away earlier, but you just didn't keep track to who had it. And then you basically asked for it back.
And that's the important part also, as you were saying, with like keeping track of trades, because it's not just one-on-one trading that can happen. As we were mentioning, there's also trading if you hand cards to your left or to your right, right? If someone calls that out, you can pass an X card to your left or right. Typically, I do feel like people try to avoid that as much as possible, because you usually don't give information or get information by doing that. But at the same time, maybe you're just like, I kind of feel like everybody knows this card already, so I'm just going to pass it along because it doesn't mean anything to me anymore, right? Kind of thing. And then if you lose track of the card that way, like, you wouldn't know. So
Yeah, the other smart way that they handle the X card is that because it's so much information,
mhm,
with the discard action, you're always all doing it simultaneously, right? Like you're discarding a card face down in front, and then everyone reveals what they discarded face up at the same time.
mhm,
But then if you or anyone discards an X card with the discard action, it actually stays face down.
yes,
So then in that way, everyone knows it's an X card in front of you, but they just don't know for what formula.
which
And
one?
so, and then that's kind of what ties into how the syringe action can be powerful,
Mhm,
right? If you're kind of behind on your information and you have a syringe card, let me see, do I have, yeah, a syringe card?
mhm,
Then one of your actions with this is you could discard this in front of a player that, just had a card face down in front of them, and you could pick up their X card.
mhm,
And so
which is in
that's
your
kind of
hand.
the power of the syringe.
Mhm. Yeah, but you also have to be careful because you know that the other thing about the syringe that's also really powerful is the fact that you're picking up a card that you know is not the antidote, right? At the end of the game, which
Mhm,
means that you could be left with a card that isn't what you need to have at the end
mhm,
of the game,
mhm.
right? Like that is a danger.
Yeah,
The
yeah.
other thing that's really powerful about the syringe, as we mentioned, though, is its ability for you to take a card at random from somebody's hand.
Mm,
So, especially when you get to the end of the game, when you only have like 3 or 2 cards left in your hand, and you're like, I don't have the right color. So let's say you've deduced and you figured it out that it's supposed to be like red is the color, but you don't have a red number in your hand, but you have a syringe. The thing about the syringe card is that you can use the syringe to steal a card from another player that's in their hand, and likely at that close at the end of the game, players are trying to discard or trying to keep the antidote or what they believe is the antidote. So you have a high chance of stealing that card away so that you can survive the round or make that other player die if that was the only antidote that was in their hand,
mhm.
right? But you have to be careful too because if the syringe, right, if it's not your turn, you can't use the syringe. And if someone makes you discard down to 1 card and you're left with the syringe in your hand, that that's not the antidote.
That
Sad
doesn't
to
save
say.
you. Yeah, it does come, it does, the syringe does kind of lead to you needing to think about your timing of when to
Yeah.
play it,
Mhm.
as you're saying. And if it isn't clear from how we've been describing it, the cards that are being discarded are constantly in front of the players. Like they don't go into like some communal discard pile. They stay face up or revealed in front of each player. And so all that information is building up over time and
Mhm.
stuff that you can see more and more information out there. But then something that the syringe then contributes to is those small little conversations you might have toward the end of the game too, right? Where it's like, hey, John, do you think you know what the antidote is? And then he's like, oh yeah, I know what it is. Like, okay, then I'm gonna syringe your hand. Just like little funny moments like that you have in the game. Again, that is interesting to see in a non-social deduction game, right? There's still these conversations you can have that aren't about bluffing and lying about these cards to anyone. I mean, obviously John doesn't have to say anything. He could have been like, I might know. But
Maybe.
it's cool that you could still have those kind of conversations even though it's not a bluffing game.
Yeah.
And then I think some of the small things that I enjoy or I like with the production of the game is there are these reference cards,
Yes.
enough for every player, which is important. No, not cheaping out on that, and just making a couple of them that everyone has to share.
Mhm.
But then it shows you all the formulas,
Mhm.
color, name, and shape. And so that's a small detail that I was mentioning to John that I think is important. It is colorblind friendly because every formula, like every card of C9 tonic, is gonna be this dark green. I don't know what that shape is
Pipette
called. I forgot.
style kind of
Uh, and have that
touching
name on
things.
it.
Mhm.
So it's easy to identify the cards and what formulas they are. And then at the bottom has those 3 actions I mentioned to you, the passing left and right or trading one-on-one with another player. That's condensed as your options for trade research.
Mhm. Mhm.
So technically 4 options you have, but they just summarize it to 3. And so, but I do like, yeah, I find this really helpful for people each person just having this and knowing what action they can take on their turn. And then, yeah, I think that's all I really have as pros for the game. Yeah, plays quick, especially with the simultaneous play. And so if we don't have other pros, we can move on to cons, things we think could be improved with the game or didn't work well.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't really have too many negatives. I actually think that this game is made really solidly and really well. Maybe a small criticism I have of the game is that it is the same every time you play it, in the sense of like the cards are always the same. There's always one X kind of in the middle, right? And there are some variations, and maybe we'll talk. I don't know if we really talked about the variants that much of like having different objectives and stuff in game. I don't think I played with the variants very much. I don't honestly think they added that much to the game overall, and I think even some of them kind of felt like it kind of deterred a little bit of the original point of the game itself. But I'll be honest, like I don't really have too much I would criticize this game for. Like production wise, it's really solid, and yeah, gameplay is just simple, straightforward.
This is gonna be like a 9.5 for you, huh?
You'll see.
So actually, yeah, John mentioned the variants, and I had mentioned it earlier too. So I believe what comes in the base set are 2 expansion modules you can play with. One is the placebo effect, which I've actually never played with, so I can't speak on that, but there are some like placebo cards and certain rules for how to include those in the game. The one I have played with a few times is the lab romance cards, where it's not even, I don't think it's even randomly dealt out rolls in the beginning. So it's not like it just switches it into social deduction, but that's kind of what the module does. But it gives you the option, I think, to maybe on your turn, if I remember, let me just see quickly, but I think it's on your turn, it gives you an action of drawing one of these social deduction cards or roll cards. That's what. Yeah, on your turn you can do that action. So, but obviously once you get one, you're just stuck with that for the game. And what that roll does is then it changes your objective for how you win the game. Kind of plays off of like the thematic idea of like a lab romance happening. So you might get a card that's like, oh, you win if you like help the person on your left stay alive at the end by the end of the game, or something like that. And so I don't think it similar with what you're saying, I don't think it added much to it, and it kind of, I don't know, kind of makes it a little strange feeling when one person has a secret objective, because it's like it just feels better that everyone knows that everyone's like racing toward the same goal. But then when you see one other person like specifically catering to you, and it's like, okay, well, that's pretty obvious, like you want me to live. So so it's a little weird. It doesn't have the same feel just because it just mixes it up for like a certain player. Or I mean, I guess technically you could deal roll out to everyone, but then that just makes everyone's roll different, and you're maybe not like, none of you are going for the same goal, and that also kind of throws off the feel, I think, of the game.
Yeah, and that's why it's ironically the add-on is, or at least that particular add-on almost feels like the con to the game, which is optional. It's totally optional. It's not part of the base game in any way. But it's like, I think it is that sense of like people who like those social deduction style games, it's giving them that opportunity to have it in this. But in reality, it's like, if you really want a social deduction game, you should just go play in a social deduction. Because those games are made to, like, they were catered around that objective versus this game, as mentioned, it's like, it feels like a tag along, and it's something that just throws the balance. It almost throws the balance off of what you're supposed to be expecting to do in the game. So
I agree. So I mean, I guess for me then, like, there are small cons which I've noticed with the game when playing, and maybe something you haven't noticed, and most people I played with haven't noticed, is because you guys aren't the ones who always set up the game. But setting up the game can take a little bit of time. It's not like putting up a board and passing out pieces and putting stuff on different spots, nothing like that. But it is always looking at that page I had mentioned, in the rules, and then pulling out the right number of each formula and the actual numbers of those cards, right? It even tells you like you play with the 1, 2, and 3 of each formula, and so you want to make sure you're not playing with like 1, 2, and 4. I mean, it's just supposed to be obviously increasing and not skipping numbers, but it's just having your cards sorted in a way so that you can quickly do that is something that I had to kind of figure out over time with putting the game away each time, of like, okay, what's the fastest way so I could pull out the right numbers of each formula for the player count that I usually play with, and then especially if you're playing up to 7, that's when you introduce what you see in John's background, the orange one, Agent U. Like that's the only case you introduce the 8th one. And so then you need to maybe sort it in a way so that, okay, the orange ones are going to be under here in this stack so that I can pull it out when we actually ever play with 7 players and include those. So it's just kind of that little bit of setup, especially if like, since it's a fast game, and you want to play it again, but then maybe next game, like another player joins and it's like, okay, then I got to go back and make sure I can pull out like the 5 of each formula and add that into the deck and shuffle that and stuff like that. So it's just something that can take a little bit of time. And you kind of, I mean, for me, it's like, I always feel like I need to focus on doing that. So I'm not like explaining any part of the game when I'm doing it. So I'm not pulling out wrong cards, including them. So yeah, that's just one of the cons I have for the game, the setup.
You could just ask us for help the next.
You're hearing me complain about it now, the pain of setting
After how many years of you doing this, never telling us that you wanted help.
Struggles. But yeah, I mean, I think that's just one of the cons that I've noticed, because I think it comes from also like, other games, like even social deduction games where the setup is in a sense simpler, right? It is usually like you always just play with all the cards, right? Or you just easily just make a deck equal to the number of players or something, something simple like that. But since you need like the specific numbers of the specific formulas with a specific number of syringes depending on player number, it just kind of a lot of these little steps adding up to making it a little longer setup. I think the other thing, that a small con that I have, which wasn't an issue most of the time, but it has come up sometimes, is I have the version from Kickstarter, as I mentioned, which then I guess one of the stretch goals from what I can remember is this My Turn card, which I'm guessing is a Kickstarter exclusive card. But I think over time, this has become pretty important to have, which I don't know if the actual retail version has, because there's times where people just like all the players forget whose turn it is, and it could be because like the player who's the active player is trying to do a trade with some player, and then that person's like, no, it's like, okay, then I'm going to trade with you. Do you want to trade? No. Okay, well, how about with you? Okay, no. Okay, then we're all just going to discard. And then everyone like does the action. Then it's like, okay, whose turn was it that made that decision to discard? Because, we were talking to this player and this player and this player. And so that has happened a few times where it's like, we just forget whose turn it is momentarily. And so even just having this card that you're passing along to indicate whose turn it is something that could help, I would say. And I'm hoping the retail version has something like that. It's just a single card.
You just get the Pearl Conch every single time, and you're to speak with this.
Oh yeah, you want to listen to that person, huh? But yeah, aside from that, I mean, here's some pictures of the lab romance we had mentioned. So like, yeah, different objectives for these different people. Actually, this is different.
Actually, that was sorry. Different. I think that
lab romance are these cards.
Yeah,
you can be Claudius or Lysander or Iago, and there's I think Juliet and Romeo somewhere. There you go.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a lab romance. This other ID card one is, I think maybe even another
variant
expansion, but I don't think it's in the rules, so it might be a Kickstarter one.
Yeah.
This ID card, but anyways, those are our thoughts, right, on the pros and cons of this game. And so with that, we will go into John guesses the weight. Wait.
wait.
And so yeah, John will guess the weight of the game, the complexity, you know, how difficult it is to pick up, how long it is to play. And if you can guess it correctly, he will win a copy of this game, which actually
Your
is
copy.
which no, not my special copy, Kickstarter copy, but it is actually I think a decently priced game.
Mhm.
Under $20, I believe, if I remember correctly.
Probably.
But it was, I just remember it was hard to get initially because it was a Kickstarter game from a small
Mhm.
publisher. But I think it's something you can just get on Amazon nowadays. And so, yeah, John will guess the weight and also give us his rating for the
Mhm.
game. So, what is your weight for the game?
Yeah. So, in terms of weight complexity, I think my guess will be a 2.11 will be my guess because it's
Okay.
deduction, so it's probably a little bit more complex, but it's still pretty simple in terms of actions, and it's very color pattern friendly and all that fun stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in terms of my rating for the game, I actually, as we went through the review and talked more about it, and especially thinking about the fact that I didn't have a lot of cons to the game, it actually changed my thought process
Up to a
in this game.
9.5.
No, not 9.5. I'm bumping it and I'm bringing it up to an 8, in my
Okay.
opinion. I was actually originally thinking 7.5.
Mm.
And the reason 7.5 previously was mainly because it's a short game, right? It's kind of a filler game overall, like in terms of speed and the ability to play, but it's done so well. And as we talk through the game again, explaining it, talking about what you do, how you play it, and just thinking back on the times we have played it, I actually have popped it up into an 8 because very simple rules, very clear rules. It's a lot of players, so we've talked about number of players before in these in previous reviews and how difficult it is to get, especially when you start adding more players, that games just usually get longer with more players. But in this game, it's actually equal no matter how many players you have, or it's mostly equal with the amount of players you have. So you can play this a lot. And yeah, like I know Ben did bring up a couple of minor quibbles to the game that I haven't really seen myself. One, because I never set it up because Ben does it for us all the time, so it's great. So I have a personal servant to do it for. No, but and then like the my turn, I don't think I ever ran into the issue of people forgetting whose turn it was when we played the game. But that's why I think my rating is an 8, because I think this ranks as one of the top quick games to play, and it's fun. It is interesting because deducing is difficult to do every single time, and while it's always the 7 or 8 ones, it's different every single time. You never know which one it's going to be, and every single time you play the game, you're dealt a new set of cards in your hand and you have no idea who has the other cards. So it's always like a new experience in trying to figure out and deduce, right? You can't use this like, oh, I have these 7 cards in my hand, that means it's guaranteed to be that card. Is like, that's never the case. You can never assume that, right? So I think that allows for this game to always have freshness in terms of what you're doing, because this game is a deduction game. So that is my rating.
Okay. And so before we go over to see the weight and see if John got that right, I'll also share my score right now. The score that I gave it is
A 5.
no, hold on. I'm just checking something. Real quickly.
Copy me, even if you wrote yours first.
I'm not copying you. You copied me. I am giving this game, and actually it's the same score that I did have before, is I'm giving it a 7.5.
Oh, he gave it a 7.5.
Yeah, I gave it a 7.5. I kept it there. I think it might just be because of the setup is such a struggle. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually just because I think a few of the filler games that have come out after, I mean, since it's been out for years, a number of years now, there are a few filler games after that I feel more inclined to play more often. Maybe because of just the the amount of hilarity or conversation in those games compared to this one, but it is still up there with some those top filler games that I would play, introduce to people. Like I said, I introduce it to a lot of people, and I think part of the big parts are because it's a pure deduction game, so it's welcoming to people who don't like bluffing games and that part of social deduction games. But then it's also the speed of it with the simultaneous play. So once people get used to how that works and everyone's hand size decreasing at the same rate, then the game goes faster. People can quickly pick up what to do in each game. And so, yeah, I gave it a 7.5. And so, John, the weight you had guessed was 2.111. So let me share the Board Game Geek page. For Antidote, 1.63.
I'm way off. I was thinking maybe it's low.
You think people are dumb.
Simple, but man, it's definitely low. Wow, a 6.3 rating. People did not like this.
That I am surprised by that.
Yeah, let's go read some people's comments and see what they said.
Wait, what?
Do they have comments?
They do.
Yeah, let's go read these comments. Let's go judge these people.
Let's
This is new.
It seems fine, not particularly interesting. I find that I don't agree with that. I mean, I think part of it is because I think people have to realize how I guess kind of uncommon pure deduction games are, if not just pure deduction, competitive pure deduction games are. Yeah. I can't think of that many, I would say. Like I mentioned before, a lot of the ones that come to mind are like cooperative, solving a mystery together, or escape room games nowadays. Let's see.
I was gonna say maybe new ones these days are like cryptid and like that kind of style, right, of games where people are giving clues and then you are deducing in that way. But what? Mind games galore, 6 out of 10. Fun. You think a fun game is only a 6 out of 10? What's wrong with you?
Well, this person is just
kidding. Just kidding. Comment people. Yeah. Don't judge
just me. The memory exercise. I don't. I mean, memory is part of it, and I guess that could be a small con. But a lot of the information is also in front of players, so you can always kind of see it. Like the most things that I come across that are like memory cases are you need to remember which X card you've seen, which you do forget sometimes, and that leads to some funny moments. Like I think that's why it's not like a heavy like, oh gosh, it's all over because I forgot. It's just like it's funny when you tell people it's like, wait, what card did I just give you? Like, oh no, you're not gonna tell me. Oh no. Like it's just light, if you remember it, then great. I mean, it's quick enough that you could just play again, try different things. And I think having the reference card is helpful because like visually, at least for people who are more visual, they can kind of look at it and be like, okay, I just remember that this top left one is one that I've seen already, so I don't need that again. Or
the best part is when you played like 30 games and you don't remember which X's you've seen from which games.
You mix it up. That's when you've been in the lab too long. Yes, I mean, I'm not very good at deduction, but I feel as though if I played more, I could improve my skills. I was glad to find this game, but it's not one.
Yeah, that's more fair.
Yeah, it's more fair. If deduction's not your kind of game, then yeah, this definitely wouldn't. That again, it's pure deduction. So if you don't enjoy it or aren't good at those kind of games, and thus you don't enjoy it, then yeah, it wouldn't be for you.
I guess luck is kind of a factor, and we never really did talk about that. I guess that could be considered a con to the game, right? Where you may be able to deduce exactly what it is, but you never see the antidote color.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was thinking about that timing part you had mentioned, right? Because with more players, there is kind of the issue of like you're waiting longer for your turn, and so there's more of a chance that if there's more players, like 5 other players and you, and all 5 of them say discard when it gets back to you, like
before it gets back.
Be over.
Yep. So I guess there is that. That's a possibility.
Yeah, so I guess that does change up the feel of the game with more
Mm.
players in that way. Like that, the action by turn doesn't change, right? Which is the more consistent feel that you get. But
Mhm.
yeah, the timing of how many turns you get will change. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
And so
I
there's
guess
that
that's a
luck
fair
to it.
one, but still
But yeah, no, at 6.3, I don't
seems
know.
pretty low
Yeah,
still.
I would say at
I'm,
least it
I'm
should be
surprised.
at least 7 on average, I would say.
I
Just
am surprised by this community.
but yeah, so that is our review of Antidote and our
Mhm.
review of those people's reviews.
Let
Yeah.
us know if you like those. No.
So yeah, I
I
gave it
would
a
do that.
7.5. John gave it an 8. And this game, actually, I did a quick search on Amazon. If you are interested in this, it is just roughly $15, which then actually is in the very good price range for a game of this field, this type, and this size, which is
Yep.
also, I think, a plus. Very
Mm.
sturdy, solid, small box game. And so, with that, thank you for watching. If you found this interesting, helpful, we hope that you'll share this with your friends, family, people you play board games with, and consider subscribing to this channel and following us on Instagram at I Got Board Game. And until next time, we will see you then. Bye.
Bye.